Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and I am so excited about today's conversation and episode with an incredible entrepreneur that I fell in love with the line of her work that she does as soon as I read the headline on her website, which says, "Unlock the potential in every conflict." Because if you've ever dealt with conflict in your internal team or with a customer or a client or with a potential customer or client, conflict is just a natural part of life, and we probably have a negative connotation towards it, whereas today's guest does such meaningful work around navigating through those to turn them into potential, to turn them into positive outcomes, to find that middle ground. So let me introduce you to today's guest. Her name is Katie Kolon. Katie provides conflict resolution services for businesses and individuals to manage workplace conflict, avoid litigation, and foster healthy environments where employees thrive and businesses succeed. She creates private and brave spaces to engage in constructive dialogue, repair relationships, and guide people to discover their own solutions to conflict. If you're hearing this bio and thinking, Katie's work probably transcends just the business world, just my entrepreneurial journey, you're right. We're all probably going to take quite a few cues from Katie here today. Katie is a certified mediator and mediation coach with the Center for Conflict Resolution, where she has volunteered for the past 13 years. She's also a certified workplace mediator and trainer in conflict resolution by the Mediation Training Institute. She's a former employment law attorney with no interest in returning to practice litigation. She founded her company Mutual Ground Mediation, and in 2024 to make a positive impact on workplace communities and beyond. There's so much cool stuff we're going to dive into. I'm excited about this one, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Katie Kolon. All right, Katie, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Heck yes. You have such a cool background. I love how you've taken law, gives you a certain perspective of the world and a way of looking at things. And obviously, you're a fellow entrepreneur. You're one of us. You've had a great professional career. So let's start there, Katie. Take us beyond the bio. Who's Katie? How did you start doing all these cool things?
I guess I like to say I went to liberal arts college and I've had a liberal arts career, and I just keep reinventing myself, I guess, from circumstance and interest. I've always been interested in a lot of different things and people, having studied anthropology and sociology.
Yeah. I would imagine, I want to go deeper there, right here off the bat. I love that that's where you started the conversation, because your love for people, anthropology, you talk about that. People are the most complex things in business is what I always argue. There's a lot of business strategy and tactics that we can work through. Talk to us about that curiosity, that understanding, that studying of humans that you've so enjoyed that plays into your work.
Yeah, well, you said it, the curiosity. I think I just always have had that. And, I've traveled and lived abroad and been faced with navigating a lot of those different worlds and cultures. And it's always just been so fascinating and interesting to me. And I think as it comes to business or dealing with conflict, that's really one of the critical pieces, is to stay curious about what is going on with people. What is their background? What's their story?
Yeah, Katie, you and I have both dropped that word a few times already. Just a few minutes into this, of course, we're here we're talking about conflict so much today. Let's start with defining that, because it seems to me, and everything I've seen about you and your business, of course, you view, as I teased at the top, the potential of conflict. What's conflict mean to you, and how do we help ourselves in our businesses and, quite frankly, in our lives, reframe our interpretation of conflict?
A conflict, I guess, is just any sort of challenge or decision point. And it can be internal conflict. It can be conflict with another person. It can be, obviously conflict in the workplace, but it doesn't have to be negative, because if you just view it as a challenge or a decision point, really, then it's an opportunity to see what is next. What can come of it.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you talk about internal conflict. I actually hadn't even anticipated that we'd go there in today's episode, but it makes me want to ask you this here in real time. The mediation techniques, the techniques that you navigate through conflict with, are they the same that we can navigate external conflict as what we can navigate internal conflict? Because as entrepreneurs, we do face both of those every single day on our journeys. Are the techniques universal? Are there different ways to deal with them?
I think so. I mean, I think we all have internal conflict, and understanding that in others will help you manage conflict on your own. Because at the heart of the model that I practice, which is facilitative and transformative styles of mediation and conflict resolution, you're really looking for, or you're helping people understand what really motivates them, what are their values, what do they need and want, essentially. And they may not know that, so there may be internal conflict there, and there may be internal conflict with the other person not knowing that. So the more you can understand that about yourself or the other person, the better off you are at finding resolutions that work for everyone.
Yeah, it's cool hearing in real time the way that, I mean, it sounds to me like you just kind of worked through a checklist of what are they interested in, what are their concerns, what are those things. Is there a checklist in your mind? Like when you're dealing with conflict, are there certain things that you look to first extract from the person you're dealing with and listen for? How do you begin to understand those things?
Yeah, well, as a mediator, we're trained in a specific process. It may not be the same. There's no regulation about what it means to be a mediator, but I'm trained, like as you mentioned, by CCR, and I coach in that model. And I mean, I think a lot of it is the same, which is you're starting off by labeling needs and interests. You're finding those through the emotions that are expressed, either through tone, body language, or actually, verbally expressed. But when you hear those emotions, then you're digging deeper to figure out what are those pointing to? What are the actual needs and interests going on? Helping people identify that by labeling them and then summarizing, so you're helping the other person understand and hear it from your voice, because sometimes they can't hear it from the person who they're in conflict with.
Yeah, you really take me back to, it's one of my favorite guests that I've ever interviewed here on the show. His name's Dr. Zachary Ginder. And Zachary shared with me a very powerful question that, Katie, I will confess here on the air, I've started to use this within conflict, is Zachary taught me to ask the question of, what are you hearing me say? And that's what I found so much in any sort of conflict, is that I express what I want to express, you express what you want to express, but just because we're expressing it doesn't mean it's being received in the same way. Talk to us about that difference, because it also has helped reshape me. I'm a big sucker for quotes, and I always think about that quote of first seek to understand and then to be understood. How does all of this play into the techniques that you use when you navigate this?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeking understanding. I like that quote. That's a good way to think about it, a good question to ask people. And I just think it is hard. I mean, that is usually when you're in conflict and you're revved up emotionally. You may not be in a place yet to hear from the other person or understand them. So that's the first part, is calming people down, especially if they're really highly, irritated, mad, or upset in any way. I mean, you're creating a space where it's safe. It feels safe. I mean, it's a goal. It's not, I'm not going to say it's safe for everyone, but you're trying to create that space where they can feel safe enough to listen and hear from the other person, as well as themselves.
Yeah, let's talk about that then, because I love the fact that plays so heavily into it, because I think about, Katie, I live down here in Florida, and Florida always makes the news for Florida Man, the quintessential news story that people see all around the country. And all too often on local news, it's not unique to Florida, it happens everywhere, but you see people on the side of the road yelling at each other. And I think to myself, you guys, it's not a good place to do this. Like, don't do this on the side of the road. Talk to us about that environment, because that's a very extreme example of truly in the heat of the moment, in a place that is not conducive to being civil and not conducive to thinking clearly. What's so important about that environment? When you talk about creating that safe environment, what are those elements and ingredients that you look at? Because, of course, it's not just physical space. It's much more than that.
I think, well, having a mediator, that's part of the mediator's job. If you don't have a mediator, I guess what I'm bringing into it is that sort of neutral space. I'm going to say that word, even though it's that's another term that's aspirational. No one's truly neutral, but you're there to hold a neutral space. You're neutral and unbiased towards the outcome. And it may be that you're going to a space where you're not, at the side of the road, just immediately in the conflict. But the other thing that makes me think of is there are positive and negative ways, or I should say, constructive and destructive ways of handling conflict, and passive and active ways of handling conflict. And when you're in the heat of the moment, it's always, you're told, people know, you got to take a step back, wait a moment, right? That is a constructive way of handling a conflict. That's a skill that's constructive. But there's the other side of that, which is avoiding conflict, which is destructive. It's a passive destructive skill. So you have to balance those two, I guess.
Yeah, I really appreciate your careful use of the term neutral, because obviously from a connotation perspective, we have societally all of these ways that we interpret these terms. You called it out as an aspirational term, and where my head goes is when we think about neutral, a lot of times we approach conflict and negotiations or anything with the mindset of, this is a zero-sum game of, if I am going to win, then you are going to lose, or vice versa. It seems to me in everything I've read about your work, Katie, you don't necessarily have that view. You have a more abundance mindset view of conflict and negotiations and outcomes. Talk to us about that, because in business, it's so often to fall into that rabbit hole of that zero-sum game.
Yeah, I think that's where everyone starts, and that's what we're trying to move people away from. So that's where people start with their positions, their demands, and they see things that way. But when you understand what you really need and what you want, then you can see how those needs can be met, and there's a lot of overlap, and you can find more creative options and solutions that can serve everyone. So it really is just kind of getting you out of that mindset so that you can think more creatively and come up with things that are better suit everyone involved.
Yeah, as with most things in business and life, obviously these things are much easier said than done. I'd love to get inside your mind, Katie, because you've obviously sat at the table and helped people work through all different types of conflict. It's easy for you and I to sit here. Obviously, we're both very even-keeled in this exact moment, but it's easy to sit there even-keeled and say, hey, you guys, I can very clearly see what types of outcomes would let everybody win and would put everybody there. When you're sitting at that table, though, with that mindset, what are some of the things that you observe in the people on both sides that you say, wait, this is holding them back? You mentioned taking a big step back from the situation. For me personally, Katie, it's breathe. I always remind myself in moments of conflict, just breathe. But what are some of those things that you see are people just being irrational? I guess that's the big bucket that I'm going to lump people into. And I want to hear your mindset on what are those moments and periods and irrational things that we tend to do that we should stray away from.
There's so many things I want to comment on there. First, that the neutrality towards the outcome is a big factor for mediators and the way that I practice. So we're not here to make judgments or tell people what to do. I'm not here to come up with solutions for you. So being neutral as a mediator includes, even though you have those ideas in your head, you're not suggesting them, and you have to be careful not to push people into those things, especially as the person in the room holding the space and the power. They can, people want to be told what to do. They want you to, they don't necessarily always want to do the hard work. And if you even slightly start to suggest what you think is right, then they might just go along with it, but it might not be best for them. So, that's where we do a lot of reality testing, but we're trying to help people think of their own solutions and then reality test them. So if I have those ideas about what I think is going to work or not work, all I'm going to do is just ask a lot of really pointed questions to get them to think, whether that works for them, using what they need, what I know they need, using what I know the other side has expressed that they need. So that is part of the process where you can use, what you're thinking of as maybe hypotheses of what might work, but you're really trying not to make any suggestions, including through the questions that you make, which can be leading. I know I just said a lot, and there was something else I was going to say in addition to that, but
Yeah, it'll come to you at some point, I'm sure, but there's so much to unpack even there. One thing I will tell you that really stands out in that last answer is how you label them as just hypotheses. And that's something I found, even to directly link it to entrepreneurship, is that the older I get, the more experienced I get as an entrepreneur, the more I realize that it's a healthy mindset to treat everything as a hypothesis. The more mature I get, Katie, the more I realize I don't know anything at all. When people ask me about marketing help, I say, well, this could work, but I'm not married to it. Talk to me about that attitude, because it seems like that's core to the type of work that you do. Is you don't enter any conversation married or tied to a specific thing, is that you're open to entertaining possibilities. That's the term that I'll use right now. How important is that as a mindset in conflict, and also knowing you're a fellow entrepreneur, how important has that just been in the work that you do?
yeah, I mean, that's it. It's incredibly important to practice that yourself and try to help people get to that point as well, so they can, like I said, come up with their own solutions for conflict. I think what I was thinking about before with your prior question and answers I was giving about people that get stuck and they're not, seeing solutions. I mean, I've had, not everyone's you're not gonna be successful all the time, and reaching resolution isn't necessarily how we measure success. But I've had a lot of parties who, you can walk them through the process, but they're still making an irrational, what you might think of as an irrational choice to, like, say, continue to litigate, and they're going to spend more money. They're going to spend more money. You've walked them through that process. They know they're going to spend more money than what they're willing to offer to settle it now. That's just, you haven't figured out a way to meet their needs, or they haven't figured it out for themselves, that maybe they're not ready. They could not be engaging in the process genuinely, but those are difficult cases. And why I say that it doesn't mean that it's not successful is because we always say, you're doing the work if you're asking the questions. They can think about them later. It may help them reach a resolution later, or figure out what's best for them at some point in time. And what is successful is just taking them through the conversation and providing that time to reflect, and see where they get.
Yeah, Katie, it's so interesting hearing you talk about these things. I feel like not only are you answering these questions as a trained mediator, and this is what you do for a living, but it's revealing so much about your mindset, which we're definitely going to talk about entrepreneurship towards the end of this conversation. But I want to raise this point because for listeners who are not watching us on video, you threw air quotes around the term successful. And I so appreciate that, because successful is all relative. And I guess this question for you is a bit philosophical of, can there or will there always be a way to make every conflict successful for all parties? Because where my ever optimistic mind goes, Katie, when you share that, is the Maya Angelou quote, which is, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. And that's something that has served me throughout my entrepreneurial journey, is even if I haven't gotten the successful resolution that I was looking for, I will internally change my mindset to view it through that positive lens. So it's a bit philosophical, like I said, but how do you kick around, is there an optimal outcome for all parties in every conflict?
No, I mean, I love philosophical questions. Like I said before, not everyone's ready to engage in a conversation. And I'm actually I have a playbook for navigating important conversations that I'm releasing soon. And with that is a questionnaire to go through to see if you should even have a conversation with the person, because it may not be worth it. It may not be the right time. Maybe you're not ready to do the work. Maybe they're not ready. Maybe it's not safe. Maybe you really don't think it's going to be productive in the end. So you can't, not all conflict is going to be resolved. It just can't. be that way. I mean, sure, you can do what you can for yourself and change your view on the situation. And I guess part of that is just saying, this is not something that I can engage in right now with this person.
Yeah, Katie, you're also really speaking to the Libra inside of me, because where I hear you, and actually you kind of alluded to it in an earlier answer where you talked about sometimes the parties will look towards the mediator to plant those ideas or to come up with solutions, and you don't want to do that, and that's not your role, of course, in mediation. But the Libra in me knows that part of what it means to be human is that we also enjoy being right, and we also love our view of fair being perceived, especially by outside parties. And how much of your work do people look towards you to kind of be the judge and jury and to say, Katie, what do you think about this? Like, aren't you on my side? We're all looking for that. How do you navigate that? Because I would imagine that's such a tough part of conflict, is people looking to, quote unquote, be right.
Yeah, and I don't want to focus on that. I'm not there to make judgments or assign blame, and focusing too much on that and on the past or the facts is never going to help move you forward. But as mediator, I am going to acknowledge the sense of unfairness, and it's part of the summarizing and being heard by the other person. You're going to acknowledge those things, and I have been asked directly, like, what should I do? Tell me what to do, and I just say, it's, I'm not here, it's not my job. My job is to really help you figure out what's best. I mean, you don't want me making decisions for your life. I have a whole different life. My decisions aren't going to be what's best for you. And in the end, if you're like, this is the judicial process is just all about assigning blame, right? And in a facilitative process, you help people find their own solutions, because those are going to be the ones that they can actually uphold in the long run. If you're just telling people what you think is right and what to do, they may follow it because maybe that's what the judge is telling them to do. But for how long? I mean, if you don't want people entering into some sort of agreement that ultimately they're not going to uphold, they're just going to end up being back in court. So they really need to buy into their own decisions. They need to, it's part of them having their own autonomy in the process, which is something you don't get through the judicial process.
Yeah, and it's really cool to hear your perspective on that, being the fact that you are a former attorney. And with that lens that you have and that you bring to businesses, I want to talk specifically about that business conflict that so frequently arises, because I want to talk about the how, the when, the where, because there's so many different choices that we can make as business owners. For example, there are times in my life where I appreciate a good email or a text message, so I have time to sit down and read it and think about it and simmer on it. And so there's also times in the real world where we have to get face to face and call someone into the office and have those real world conversations. What's your take on those different arenas that we can have those in, and asynchronous versus synchronous, because they're very different ways of dealing with conflict?
Yeah. Well, it's, we used to do all of the mediations for CCR used to always be in person. And then after the pandemic, they're almost all virtual, and there are benefits to both. But I think that having actual conversation in the room face to face is necessary to some extent for understanding and for expressing and recognizing the emotional impact of whatever it is that's going on, which you don't necessarily get through, emails. I mean, you can, but I think that there is an element of just being like two humans in a room, even if it's virtual, together, reading body language and tone. I mean, that's another skill set as a mediator, is just observing and noting what's going on to get people to reflect on that. So those are all things that can't happen asynchronously. And also, I'll have to say, I don't think yet can happen with AI.
Yeah, I'm glad that you called that out because we're at that point in time right now where everybody thinks AI is the band-aid to all of these things. And what I really like about your business, Katie, is it sounds to me like you've got a really fun client roster. You work with growing SaaS businesses, you work with family businesses that are planning for succession. There's so much to unpack there. And obviously, especially when it comes to those SaaS businesses, a lot of them probably are very focused on technology. They are looking for those technology solutions, whereas you bring to the table real world human experience. And so with that in mind, I'm curious, those businesses that you work with, how many of them turn to you and say, Katie, are there things we can be doing today to prevent future conflict? Are there preventative things that we can put in place and think about now before they arise? How much of your work is included in that scope?
Yeah, I mean, I really want to be preventative. I mean, I want to be doing more preventative work than reactive. I always have. That's been like a driving sort of, I guess, value in the things that I pursue. But I think that usually people are going to come because they have a specific problem or acute conflict. But so there's either the acute conflict situation, which is not preventative. The other one is potentially training. So I think that is a way to be more preventative, is just giving people the skills. And I focus on skills and, more of like a workshop style, because it doesn't matter if you understand everything that I'm saying here today. I mean, look, I'm a mediator. Doesn't mean I'm good at dealing with conflict on my own. These are skills that are hard. It's hard when you're in conflict, and it takes a lot of practice.
Yeah, I love that. And especially, I'm a big fan, Katie, of anyone who ties skills to practice, because the two go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And so with that in mind, Katie, what are some of those skills? And I'm going to turn the mic on you and put you on the spot for a little bit, because I'll remind listeners that you're not just a mediator, you're a fellow entrepreneur. You're one of us. And so you understand the real world challenges that we face internally, the self-doubt that comes with growing a business, the questions as we scale and as we reach those various inflection points. So Katie, what are some of those skills that we can and should all be focusing on, not only as leaders, but as entrepreneurs ourselves?
I think one of the things that I've really had to, and I've only been in business for a little over a year and a half or so, is just figuring out my branding and, I guess, my market and those sorts of things, which are still evolving, I would say. But the more that I focus on what I know and what I can do and what I like, and who I am, like, that's what people tell you a lot. It's just what is unique about you, bringing that to your work. That's helpful guidance, both in making you feel less like an imposter and in branding. So it's a work in progress, but that would be my main tip.
Yeah, always a work in progress, isn't it, Katie? That's such an important mindset piece that we can bring to the table. I'm super curious because I do feel like, actually, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. To me, kind of the lawyer hat that you are able to wear, as well as the mediator hat that you're able to wear, and also the fact that you're working with real life businesses as your clients, it seems to me like those are a little bit of differing mindsets. Because when I think about a lawyer whose goal is to prevent litigation, Katie, that's not always common, but I would imagine it's part of your personal evolution and what you bring to the table. How have those played off of each other to actually enhance the way that you operate in your role?
Well, I think being an attorney and an employment attorney, especially, I know what it's going to take to pursue a case, and it's a long time. Like, if you have a discrimination case, it's probably going to be a few years in court. It's very stressful. It's probably going to settle. Everyone thinks they're going to get their day in court. But that's another thing that going through like a mediation helps, is you have the time to tell your story and be heard. It's not necessarily something you're going to get in court. And then it's just a lot of stress. I think it's a lot of time investment. It's a lot of stress. People aren't necessarily going to get the money they think they're going to get, or they don't realize what they're going to have to pay their attorneys, or how that works. I mean, with an employment litigation, you're getting a percentage paid out of the fees if you win from the other side, but maybe the party that you're representing doesn't know or hasn't thought about that. They're just like, they see the big number and they don't realize a chunk of that's going to go to your attorney who's been working on this for like 3 years, 5 years, whatever it might be. So I don't know. I guess I'm going on a lot of different tangents now, but I'm not sure if that answered the question.
I'd argue those tangents actually reveal a little bit of your secret sauce, because you're right. I'm picturing sitting at a mediation table with you and you turning to me and saying, you don't want to do this. Like, you don't want to litigate this. And I'm going to listen to you even more knowing your background as an attorney. So yeah, it actually makes sense. It brings a lot more clout to what it is. And you obviously have the experience, the fact that you can point out, this is not clear cut. It's not going to be what you think it is going to be from all those law TV shows that we've all watched. That's a very helpful perspective to bring there. So Katie, I told you time would fly by here in today's episode, and I always love asking this question at the end of every episode because we jumped from so many topics and so many considerations today. I really appreciate hearing not just your expertise, but also in real time the way that you think about these things. So with all the things we talked about, and also with your entrepreneurial hat on, what's your one best piece of advice for listeners? Because for them hearing us talk today about all these different things, they're probably thinking, all right, I need to focus on some preventative stuff, but I also need to change my attitude towards conflict and the way that I look for that mutual ground. What's that one best piece of advice that you want to leave them with today?
So if you are dealing with a conflict with someone, I think it's helpful to think about people as method actors. So, I was listening to an interview with Hugh Grant talking about preparing for a role, and he wrote like pages and pages and pages of backstory, and he brings all that to the role. It may not ever come out, you may never know, but people have that going on. And I know, people say like, what you think about what else is going on in their lives, and that's why method actors do this. But I think it's just a way to illustrate like just how much complexity there is in people's lives that may be contributing to the way that they're acting. So looking for some of those things, some of the backstory may help you in acknowledging their experience and moving forward in a positive way.
Yeah, I really love that advice. And Katie, I'll just say while we're here on the air together that I so admire the way that you approach these types of conflict and these types of conversations. And I personally, I knew it even before we got together today because your website lays it out so beautifully. You also talk about, there's a whole section on your website about why conflict matters. You've got statistics that point out of, hey, even if you think you can ignore these things, like here's the reality of what it means to be human and what it means to be in the workplace. So with all of that in mind, Katie, where should listeners go from here if they want to find out more about you and all the great work that you're doing with your company?
Yeah, my website is mutual-ground.com, and I've recently changed my business name, so it's Mutual Ground Strategies now, just to encompass a broader picture of things that I can do beyond mediation. And yeah, I just also want to mention that we just launched a partnership with an organization called The Wolf and the Bee to provide coaching services and tools for people going through workplace harassment, discrimination, bullying, what have you. So coaching around what's next and making the best decision for you before going down any one of those paths, and maybe finding that you're now on a path you didn't intend to be on. So I just wanted to put a plug in for that.
Yes, I love that, Katie. And listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find that link down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. Katie, I even love the name of your company, and I don't know how you got that domain name. It's mutual-ground.com. Listeners, click right on through. It's really cool because all those things that Katie just teased here on the air, you can find those on her website, as well as a big old button. It's actually a few buttons on her website that says schedule consultation. So if you want to harness her experience, her even-keeledness in your business, in your workplace environment, and especially in the conflicts that we all inevitably deal with, then definitely go to mutual-ground.com. Otherwise, Katie, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you. This was great.